Hey there. Today we are going to check out a different kind of operating system for the Raspberry Pi. Let me make sure I'm full screen here so you can get as much of this in as you can. Today we're going to look at Lakka. As you can see, Lakka is a retro gaming console emulator for the Raspberry Pi. I know some people had mentioned that RetroArch and some of the other ones were not as friendly, and they weren't as interested in running them, and it kind of turned them off from emulation. So I thought I would look at this one and see if this was any better. Now, if you're watching this to see performance and benchmarks of games, unfortunately, I am not going to play any emulated games on here. We are just going to evaluate the install and how well that succeeds on a Raspberry Pi 3. And check general system performance at the menu level. If it can't do that, then it can't do anything. But with all of the hubbub that's been going on about emulators, I'm not going to do any emulation videos anytime soon. So what does Lakka get us that maybe some of the other ones don't? So Lakka is built on RetroArch, which is great because maybe it takes some of the good of RetroArch and gets rid of some of the things that people don't like. Now, as most of these applications are personal preference, I really can't say whether this is something you're going to be interested in or not, because it's going to depend on the things that you do or do not like about RetroArch. So I'm going to look at it from an open perspective because I have no problem with either. So in my opinion, all of them are good applications to solve what would be a need that people are looking for. So it says it's user-friendly, it's easy to set up, and once installed, you just have to copy ROMs onto the device, power it up, and plug in your joypad. And we're going to be using this with an Xbox One controller, most likely. So we're going to see how well it can find it, and it will try some of this automatic joypad recognition, which is one of the problems I think some people have is when you plug in your joypad, you have to configure what it is and do all kinds of stuff, and it's not as fun. But some of the other features it looks like it has, and we're going to look at some of these because some of these sound interesting, and if we can get more detail on them, that may be kind of cool. It's open source, so you can look and see what's going on if you need to, which is kind of cool. Low cost. Try our best to keep the hardware required to run Lakka as cheap as possible. The software is optimized to run fast even on low-end computers, and we support a lot of USB joypads. So I was wondering what low cost was going to mean, because since it's open source and free, low cost kind of threw me for a loop, because how do you justify calling something free as low cost? That's no cost. But I see what they mean now, based on the hardware required to run it and the overhead is low. So we're going to be running this version, Lakka, on the Raspberry Pi. Easiest way to set up an emulator on the Raspberry Pi. Since it's an affordable single-board computer, powerful enough to emulate most retro consoles such as the NES, the Sega Genesis, the PlayStation, or arcade games, which is pretty much a good starting point for a lot of this. It'll get you into emulation if you're kind of on the fence for not a big investment. I mean, Raspberry Pi case, a power supply, SD card, and pretty much the cables and everything you need to run it is probably going to run you somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 if you just buy a package deal off of Amazon. And if you're savvy on other things, you can spend $35 on the board and fill in the rest yourself, however you want to do it. So that's pretty low cost. I don't know too many people who couldn't come up with $35 for a small single board computer. And if that's stretching your budget, then you're probably going to have issues in other areas as well. So it's kind of the gateway point to getting into this is having a Raspberry Pi or getting a Raspberry Pi. But like I said, I know you can get deals on them on a 3 on Amazon for about $90, and that'll get you started. I'm not going to put links to where you can buy them because I don't particularly favor any of those. What I did with mine was I buy my boards for the base price at $35 or $30 if they're on sale at Micro Center, or less. Sometimes I've gotten them for less. And I 3D print a case for them. I have loads of SD cards, so I don't have to worry about those. And the rest of the controllers and whatnot I already have. So for me, it's just an investment of $35. For you, it may be something a little bit more expensive or less expensive. And it is an official Linux distribution of RetroArch and the Libretto ecosystem. Each game system is implemented as a Libretto core. Front end of RetroArch takes care of inputs and display. The clear separation ensures modularity and centralized configuration, which is awesome because you have a big overhead display and input handling task that does all those jobs, and then you have a back end that does all the emulation, which is how it should work. Everything should feed into your display. Your display should not be responsible for displaying the games, or should not be responsible for playing the games. Makes it more compartmentalized or modular, because if you don't want one of these systems in there for whatever reason, you're not loading the module and taking up memory and space. Now let's look at this learn more on the powerful, because I want to know what this thing can do. Okay, supported systems, and here is the supported systems, and this is why it says it's powerful. Now, of course, a lot of these are not going to work on the Raspberry Pi due to the fact that the system just is not strong enough. But looking at this list, we have the majority of the systems in here that are covered. And I have a feeling we should have no problem with the Atari 2600, probably even the 7800 with the Raspberry Pi. DOS shouldn't be an issue. Doom shouldn't be an issue, but if you're going to play Doom, you can play the Raspberry Pi's version of Doom, and you should be pretty good. Now, FB Alpha arcade games. I've not seen that one before, so I don't know how that would work. But MAME should work, and it is here, MAME 2003. It does have emulation support for the Odyssey 2, which is awesome, because I had so many of the games for the Odyssey 2. I actually had most all of them at one point, and I sold them because my console broke and I didn't feel like buying another one. Does it do ColecoVision? I don't see where it does. Maybe we'll find it down here under the brand. So the NEC PC Engine, Super Graphics, Famicom Disk System, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, Game Boy N64, DS, NES, Teleview, Neo Geo Pocket Color, Quake 1, Virtual Boy, yeah, that's what I want it for. I want to play Virtual Boy games on it. Sega 32X. It's got a lot of systems, but I still really just don't see Intellivision and ColecoVision. I would love to see those. Maybe those are available. They're just not listed in here because they're not very popular. But I grew up in the age of when the ColecoVision and the Intellivision were very popular systems, so I like to see those in the list, and I do not see them, which is fine. And here's all the supported hardware that you can use at this time: the Odroid, the Qbox, the Hummingbird, the Banana Pi, the Raspberry Pi, of course, and a 32-bit or 64-bit PC. And here's what we're looking for, the features. It does offer firmware updates, which is awesome, because when things come out, I like applications that can update themselves. Multiplayer. You can play games with up to 5 players. I have a feeling you'd need a more powerful PC than a Raspberry Pi to do much multiplayer. CRT, smoothing, scan lines, and handheld borders, so you can kind of add in that old school filter look, which is kind of cool. Save states, net play, enjoy your favorite multiplayer games over the network. Kind of interesting. Rewind. This optional feature allows you to rewind your game at the press of a key. So I'm wondering how that interacts with the game itself, and if that is universal or if it has problems with some games backing things up. But that'd be kind of cool, because then you would not have to worry so much about if you're playing a game that you always wanted to beat and it was really hard and you needed to make it through an area without an issue, and you could, if you died, you could rewind so that you didn't lose your last life. That might help. But we'll have to, well, we're not going to see what that is, but that would be something to check out. Wireless joypads. Some wireless joypads are supported out of the box. The Xbox 360, DualShock 3, and 8-bit Do for more gaming comfort. We're going to be using a wired joystick because I want to see the automatic configuration, and all our emulators are compiled with the best optimization for your particular hardware. So what I'm guessing is going to happen, and we'll see in a minute if this is correct, if the system is not supported on your hardware, excuse my voice, then it will not show up in the list. So I'm thinking if our Raspberry Pi 3 doesn't have the oomph to handle some of these systems, they won't be present. But that could be different, and I have not run this yet. But I will put a link to the Lakka.tv page in the description below so that you don't forget about it. And we can begin with the loading. So loading this is exactly the same as every other Raspberry Pi image. I've got videos that I've made on 3 different ways you can load the image to an SD card in a Raspberry Pi down below in the description. If you need any more insight in these, please comment on the videos and I'll be happy to update them with whatever information you need. I do not have one for Linux because pretty much if you run Linux, you already know how to use DD and you really don't need my help. If you need help, I would definitely offer to make one, but there was no real, nobody took me up on the offer. So, and for the Mac, my current MacBook does not have the ability to make SD cards anymore. My controller port is blown and will not read cards. So I do not have the ability to show you how to do it on a Mac. I thought I was going to get it fixed, but the cost of it pretty much came to the cost of a new one, and I am not in a position to buy a new one right now. So we're going to do what we always do. Take this downloaded image. We had to extract this so that we can get the actual image file out, and then we burned the image with, I used Etcher this time. Excuse me. I know I said I like to use Rufus, but I've been using Etcher more and more because the newer version of Etcher is just as convenient. And for simple burns like this, it's actually just a lot easier than setting up Rufus to do things. Even though I really still like Rufus, especially for more complicated operating systems, Etcher has been my go-to lately, and this was easy to burn using Etcher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the boot process in real time so that you can see it, and that way you know about how long it's going to take for your Raspberry Pi to boot up with this operating system on it. Normally, a lot of places speed them up, but that doesn't give you an actual perspective on how long it's going to take. And I know a lot of times I've watched videos and I've wondered why mine's taking so long, and then I go back and I realize that they've sped it up 4 times. For those of you who are impatient, you can definitely speed up the video, but I do want to provide a kind of a good guideline as to how long it should take for this to boot up, because in the previous operating systems we've installed, there have been some times where they've paused to load modules, updates, do things that take time in the background, and you wouldn't understand those things going on because you don't see them, but they eventually move on and complete. Now I am using a wired connection to the internet for my Raspberry Pi because I do not want to, and I do not usually set up a Raspberry Pi for the first time trying to use wireless, mostly unless I have a config file on the SD card that I can edit in advance, and I don't know what that I do on this one. So in this case, I do not use wireless to configure it. I can maybe set up wireless later, but I always boot my images on wired connection first because that is just my preference. Feel free to do yours however you want. We'll see how far in you have to get in order to configure the wireless. But if things are going to do an update on first boot, I like them to have the availability to be able to do those updates, and that's why I do that. I am using, as I said, a wired Xbox One controller, and I am recording it with my Razer Ripsaw, because a lot of people have asked me how I record these, and I'm making very clear in these videos what I'm using to record them and the hardware that I have in place. So let's move on to the actual loading and the first boot. I've already burned the image file. You don't need to see that. You can watch me burn an image file in the other video if you want to see how that's done, like I said. But we're just going to go straight into the first boot so you can watch that and see how it comes up, what happens, and what configurations are available at what points in the first startup. So on to that, and I'll see you there. So here we go with the first boot up. And I did have one change to what I was doing. I actually do not have a spare USB cable for my Xbox One controller, so we're going to see how this works with keyboard and mouse. Since we're not playing any games, it's not essential that we have a we have a controller hooked up. So in the first boot it did resizing, and then it paused and it restarted. But it was very good about telling us exactly what it was doing. And here we go. And that's all there was to it. It's pretty much done. So let's see if we have mouse support. It does not look like we do. But we do have keyboard support, so that's great. Okay, let's see what we got. So let's start at the start. So we can select which core to use. Wow, we got the full deal. VIC-20s, 128s, handheld electronics, cool. Alright, hey, and television, it is in there. Was not on the main page. It even does RPG Maker games. That is awesome. Again, I apologize for my voice. Alright, so Escape didn't go back. Escape took us out. Did it reboot? No, just took us back. Okay. Load content. Select which content to start. Tells us where to look and where to show hidden folders. Filter unknown extensions. That's weird. Most of them would filter known extensions. Built-in media player. Filter curtain core. Automatically add content to playlist. That sounds like a great solution. So escape goes back if you're using a keyboard. Online updater. Let's check the online updater because we just downloaded this, so we'll see what it does if we run the update. To ARM21. So it looks like there are, maybe it's checking it nightly and it's running that. So first thing I usually do is update things, so I will allow it to download whatever it wants. Kind of a weird way to do it. Counting up to +1 each time and restarting. Okay, this doesn't look very promising. Ah, there we go. So that was one of those things where it's good to see how long of a delay it has. Not giving us a lot of information here. I'm guessing maybe next reboot it will apply any updates. What other update options did we have? Thumbnail updater and content downloader. Okay, so those must download the individual emulators. Fine with that. Information. Let's look at system information. Okay, so here would be where we could probably set up wireless. I'm sure that you have to actually edit that from the configuration file, or deeper in the system maybe we'll find that. What other system information did it give us? Some more system information. Database manager, cursor manager. Alright. I don't want to go into too many of these because once we go into them we got to escape out of them and it takes us back to this window. And then we got reboot and shutdown. So next we can change the video output settings. Aspect ratio. Lots of good configuration settings here. I'm sure if you're running this on a PC you'll have better control over it, but Raspberry Pi is a little limited on what it can do. Although not too limited. It does a lot of things. Next, audio. There's really no audio settings except going out through the HDMI cable, unless you have other speakers plugged into it, so that's good. Input. Change joypad, keyboard, and mouse settings. So this just does user binds and stuff. I don't actually see where it lets us do a keyboard. Okay. Well, that's kind of interesting. But I do like how responsive the menu is. It is actually pretty cool. User interface. Achievements. Change achievement settings. What achievements do we have? Oh, retroachievements.org. Okay. And you put in your user ID and password. You can set hardcore mode to disable save states, cheats, rewind, pause, slow motion for all games. Which you should if you're adhering to the rules. Leaderboards, achievement badges, verbose mode, and automatic screenshot of the achievements, which is awesome. Although sometimes if it stutters when it takes the screenshot, it kind of throws you if you're in the middle of doing something. And Wi-Fi, services, user, directory. So you can change where it looks for the files. No favorites, no playlists. NetHost play, connect to NetHost, refresh rooms list. Okay, cool. Scan a directory or scan a file. Awesome. All right, so let's make sure we can actually do Wi-Fi things. I'm only seeing 3 of the Wi-Fis in my area, and there are a number more that should be showing up, and they're not. So, it could be because I'm in the middle of a storm right now. Anyway, that's the basics of Lakka, and I have a feeling this could be a good replacement for traditional RetroBox or one of those that you're using that may not be your favorite. Something worth trying and something I wanted to bring to the attention of my viewers, because I've had a lot of people comment that other emulator on the Raspberry Pi was not necessarily what they're looking for. This may provide you with something that you do like and maybe get you interested again and all fired up about emulators of any kind. I know it's kind of a hot subject right now with all of the emulation stuff out there going haywire, but this emulates a lot of systems that wouldn't necessarily be a problem to emulate. There are a lot of different free versions of DOS that you could use, for example, to legitimately emulate a DOS system and play things like classic text-based games from long ago, looking for a legitimate reason. So if we're looking at the list of, where was that? Was that under the online updater? So let's look at the content downloader. Arcade, well, that's iffy because arcades are, well, if you own the board, you could probably emulate it. So I own a number of JAMA boards, so 2600. I don't think Atari is really going to come after you, but don't hold me to that. And the ColecoVision is in here. That's awesome. Doom actually has a variant for everything. You can even play it on your refrigerator, so I don't see where that's going to be a big deal. DOS, like I said, there are so many free versions of DOS that you can use to play games that are text-based and old. Not really a problem there. I use an emulator to play Wizardry on my PC because it doesn't work very well on Windows 10. Easy RPG, so that gives you like a module to play RPG Maker, older RPG Maker games. So that's awesome. Now, here's where you start running into trouble. Right about here. None of these are going to be a good idea. So all of these Nintendo ones, I have a feeling in the future most of the emulators are probably going to start pulling Nintendo emulators out of their package if Nintendo starts to push it that far. But in reality, they're the ones who are going after the people the most. Got some Sega ones, PlayStation. Alright, so barring the fact of the controversial Nintendo section, there are legitimate things you can do with this that make it a valid application and will continue to make it a valid application, because worst case they're going to cease and desist on some particular emulator, take it out, but they've still got ones that serve a purpose. So that will further the project down the road to be able to have DOS support, to have easy RPG support, to have support for other systems that are not necessarily as aggressively pursuing people for emulation. And I'm not telling you emulation is good or bad. I'm just telling you that looking at this makes me realize that there is a potential that if Nintendo dives deeper into it, taking away the sites that hold the emulations, that they may start going after the people who create the emulations. And if that's the case, at the very least, this one still has some life left in it based on the fact that it houses many different emulators that are not based in that fact. And a lot of them that have a legitimate reason for existing. So that seems to give it a lot of credibility. So awesome for them there. Like I said, menu is pretty snappy on the Raspberry Pi 3. I'm not going to play any games because I'm not taking a risk that anything's going to come back to me whatsoever for that. It didn't take me long to set this up. As you can see, this video probably would have been like 5 minutes if I wouldn't have talked so much. And that's all it's going to take for you is one SD card and a Raspberry Pi to find out if this is the application that you like over one of the other ones that may be causing you trouble. So if you have any questions, post them down below. Lakka has a really good user base. There's also a subreddit for it that seems to be fairly helpful, so definitely should give you any information you need to know. So if you're having difficulty, you could turn to those two places and hopefully you'll get some assistance, or you can ask me and I'll do my best to try to answer any questions you have, even though I'm not actively running this. So that's it for Lakka. Definitely check out the links below if you're interested in trying out a newer emulator system that seems to be growing and doing pretty good. But that should get you going there, and I'll catch you guys in the next video where we'll install and configure another operating system on the Raspberry Pi 3. Look forward to talking to you then. I'll see you later. Thanks for watching.